So I want to give you a chance to continue in worship. And perhaps even enter in if you haven't already. You know, sometimes we can sort of fall into the trap of segmenting things or categorizing things. When it comes to worship, you know, just one way to do that is singing to the Lord like we have been this morning. And yet, in essence, you know, the idea of worship can have much less to do even with instruments than it does to do with obedience in our heart, submission to the Lord. And I want to encourage you in that this morning. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the story in 1 Samuel 15, where King Saul, you know, was the king of the Israelite people at that time. And he completed what he believed in his heart to be obedience to the Lord, and something instruction the Lord had given him via Samuel. But in his own wisdom, in his human wisdom, came somewhat short, you know. He'd been instructed by the Lord to destroy the Amalekites and all that they had, but in his wisdom held aside many of the animals for a good intent, you know, to sacrifice to the Lord or to worship the Lord even. But that wasn't the instruction of the Lord. The Lord was looking for obedience. And we can see that it was obviously a serious offense to the Lord, so much so that he said to Samuel, I regret that I made Saul king. And so this is what Samuel said to Saul at that time. He said, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. So I just feel this encouragement this morning to share with you that heart of obedience, laying down ourselves before the Lord for what he wants. A submission out in our hearts is a real act of worship. In fact, one of the original Hebrew terms for the word worship is the word shakor, which means to bow, to depress, to bow down, so in a physical format, or to fall down flat. And we see many examples of this through the scripture. And in fact, it's a very correct response before a holy and awesome God. To fall down before him, to bow before him. Yeah. Contrast that with where we see many times in the scripture God's people reprimanded for the very opposite. I'm sure you would have seen these terms stiff-necked, stubborn, used a lot of times through the scripture, you know, for God's people when they were choosing not to lay down their own will, not to submit to the Lord, but in their own wisdom had a way to go. So I want to encourage myself and all of us this morning, let that not be said of us. Let's not be stiff-necked before the Lord. Let's not be stubborn before him. You know, if you think of that in a physical picture of being stiff-necked, and the way it stiffens your whole down the back, it makes it very difficult to do the opposite of that word that we just learned about there, to bow before the Lord. You know, how can you bow with a stiff neck?
Yeah.
So this morning, as we prepare to receive the symbols of communion, thank you to those who are serving us. I want to invite you to bow in whatever way you can. As I've just mentioned, you know, worship is submission in obedience. And so I'm going to, I'm going to bow before the Lord as we do this. And I want to encourage you in whatever way you can. I'd even encourage you to go one step further than you have before if you can. You know, there's something of the overflow of the heart that is shown in our body externally. It can be seen, the overflow of the heart. So I want to encourage you, you know, there is an element of humbling in this sometimes as we come to show the Lord the obedience and submission in our heart. I encourage you to do this. So we're going to take just 1 minute before we partake together of the Vicky and the juice and just submit before the Lord. And I want to encourage you in this time to just take a moment of silence to yourself and just prepare your heart before the Lord. Examine your heart and let's say, Father, show me my heart. Any area, Lord, of stubbornness, of stiff-neckedness, of anything that is of myself and that is not of you, that I haven't submitted to you, Lord. Just pray that you would show that to us now.